A new and explosive lawsuit against FBI Director Kash Patel, filed by former FBI executives he fired. That lawsuit alleges Patel knowingly broke the law when he carried out the firings at the behest of the White House, and it quotes him as saying he knew he could get sued for firing agents without cause, but that his job depended on removing people who had worked on cases against President Trump because, quote, the FBI tried to put the president in jail and he hasn't forgotten it. Joining me now, the MSNBC correspondents who got the early information about this lawsuit. They've been poring over it. Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian. Ken, what should we know? What stands out about this lawsuit?
Carol, the most striking thing about this stunning lawsuit is that it recounts alleged behind-the-scenes conversations with some of the biggest players in the Trump Justice Department. We're talking about FBI Director Kash Patel, Deputy Director Dan Bongino, and then senior DOJ official Emil Bovee. Look, our viewers have heard a lot about how the FBI has been politicized. Carol and I have been reporting on these issues for months.
All right, guys, Adam is here. So this is what just happened. The administration never saw coming, something that changes the entire trajectory of Trump's second term in ways that no one in the West Wing was prepared for. FBI agents are suing their own bosses, not low-level bureaucrats, not political appointees who are unhappy with their assignments. Federal law enforcement officers, people who spent their careers upholding the Constitution, are now taking the director of the FBI and the Attorney General of the United States directly to court.
A federal lawsuit filed in Washington alleges that a dozen former FBI agents were unlawfully fired during Trump's second term for steps they took in 2020 to prevent unrest after George Floyd's killing. A group of 12 former FBI agents says they were wrongfully fired during the second Trump administration earlier this year. They claim their termination stems from actions they took in 2020 as they tried to diffuse tensions after the killing of George Floyd. The agents say they were dismissed for kneeling during a volatile crowd encounter in Washington, D.C. As protests intensified, their lawsuit alleges Attorney General Pam Bondi, FBI Director Kash Patel, and the Justice Department targeted them unfairly. They argue officials wrongly viewed them as not aligned with President Trump, leading to their removal from the Bureau.
They are alleging constitutional violations. They are alleging political retaliation. They are alleging that they were fired for one reason and one reason only, because they had the misfortune of working on cases that Donald Trump did not like. And the White House is scrambling. Insiders are briefing off the record, trying to shape the narrative, trying to contain the damage, trying to figure out how to respond to a crisis that is spiraling faster than anyone anticipated.
It alleges that Patel fired senior FBI executives on orders from the White House for reasons that were totally political. That's against the law, and the lawsuit says Patel acknowledged knowing it was against the law. He allegedly said he knew he would be sued, but that his job depended on him carrying out the orders of the White House. And what's really shocking to me is that many of these decisions seem to be driven by a small number of MAGA activists on social media who pressured Patel, Bongino, and the White House, often leveling false allegations against decorated FBI leaders. And to give you one example, MAGA activists falsely claimed, according to the lawsuit, that an FBI agent named Christopher Meyer, a military veteran, had participated in the Mar-a-Lago search.
Because this is not just a lawsuit. This is a symptom of something much deeper, much more dangerous, much more politically devastating. This is the institutional collapse of the Department of Justice playing out in real time, with Trump's own appointees at the center of it, and with the White House unable to stop it. So let's walk through exactly what is happening, why it matters, and why the panic inside the White House is not just justified, it is only the beginning. Let me take you inside the lawsuit that has the White House in full damage control mode. 2 FBI agents. Their names are not household names. They were not the faces of any high-profile investigation. They were not making decisions about indictments or prosecutions. These were administrative employees, support staff, people whose roles were limited to data logging, to paperwork, to the kind of behind-the-scenes work that keeps an investigation running but never makes the headlines. And their only sin, the only reason they were targeted, was that they were assigned to work on the special counsel's investigation into election interference, the investigation that looked at Trump's conduct following the 2020 election. For that minor administrative non-decision-making involvement, they were fired, terminated, shown the door. And then, after they were fired, they started receiving death threats. Real threats. The kind of threats that make you look over your shoulder. The kind of threats that make you worry about your family's safety. Threats that came directly from the environment that Trump and his allies had created. An environment where anyone who investigated the former president was labeled corrupt, was labeled disloyal, was labeled an enemy. Now those agents are fighting back. They have filed a lawsuit in federal court naming the two most powerful law enforcement officials in the country as defendants, FBI Director Kash Patel and Attorney General Pam Bondi. And the allegations in that lawsuit are devastating. The agents claim they were fired solely because of their political beliefs, solely because they worked on a case that Trump hated, solely because their names appeared on documents related to an investigation that Trump considers a personal vendetta. They claim that the firings had nothing to do with their performance, nothing to do with their qualifications, nothing to do with anything other than disloyalty to Donald Trump. And they are not just alleging political retaliation. They are alleging violations of the First Amendment, which protects government employees from being fired for their political associations. They are alleging violations of the Fifth Amendment, which guarantees due process before the government can deprive someone of their job. They are alleging that Patel and Bondi knew these firings were likely illegal, knew that courts have repeatedly ruled that political firings violate the Constitution, and did it anyway, because Trump demanded it, because Trump wanted revenge, because Trump sees the Department of Justice not as an institution of justice, but as a weapon to be wielded against his enemies. This is not hyperbole. This is what the lawsuit says. This is what the agents are prepared to prove in court. Now let's talk about the people at the center of this, because understanding who Kash Patel and Pam Bondi are helps you understand why this lawsuit is so damaging to Trump. Kash Patel is the director of the FBI. He came into that role with a clear mandate from Trump: purge the bureau, remove anyone who was involved in investigations that Trump perceived as targeting him, clean house, make the FBI loyal to the president rather than to the Constitution. And Patel has been executing that mandate with enthusiasm. He has been systematically firing people, targeting investigators, removing anyone whose record shows they worked on cases Trump didn't like. He is doing this while knowing that courts have repeatedly ruled that political firings from federal law enforcement are unconstitutional. He is doing this anyway because Trump wants it, because Trump demanded it, because Trump's revenge is more important than the rule of law. Pam Bondi is the Attorney General. She is the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States. Her job is to ensure that the Department of Justice operates with integrity, with independence, with fidelity to the Constitution. Instead, she is overseeing the weaponization of the department. She is approving these terminations. She is allowing the firings to proceed. She is complicit in the retaliation, complicit in the constitutional violations, complicit in turning the DOJ into a tool of Trump's personal revenge. And she knows what is happening. She knows it is wrong. She knows that prior lawsuits have established that what Patel is doing is likely illegal. But she is allowing it anyway because she serves Trump, not the Constitution. And now both of them are named as defendants in a federal lawsuit brought by the very people they fired. That is not just a legal problem. That is a political nightmare. The head of the FBI and the head of the DOJ are being sued by their own employees for violating the Constitution. That is the kind of story that defines a presidency. That is the kind of story that dominates news cycles for weeks. That is the kind of story that voters remember when they go to the polls. But the lawsuit is only part of the story. The context in which this lawsuit is being filed is what makes it truly devastating for Trump. Let me give you the full picture of what is happening right now. Trump's approval rating has collapsed to 38%. That is not a number that signals strength. That is a number that signals vulnerability. That is the kind of number that makes Republican members of Congress start thinking about their own survival rather than loyalty to the president. Trump is facing the highest impeachment odds of his second term. The threats are coming from multiple directions: foreign policy, domestic policy, and now the escalating crisis at the Justice Department. And these are not idle threats. The margins in Congress are razor thin, and there are enough Republicans who are nervous about their re-election prospects that the impeachment math is shifting in ways that terrify the White House. Trump is losing decisively in the courts on immigration. The administration's signature policy initiatives are being blocked, delayed, overturned by federal judges across the country. The legal losses are piling up, and each loss chips away at the narrative of a strong, effective president who gets things done. Republican senators are fleeing re-election. In competitive states, GOP incumbents are looking at the political landscape and deciding that they would rather retire than run with Trump at the top of the ticket. That is not a sign of confidence. That is a sign of a party that is starting to abandon its leader. And now, on top of all of that, the Justice Department is in institutional chaos. The FBI is being sued by its own agents. The DOJ is being exposed for political retaliation. The administration is facing a legal challenge that goes to the very heart of whether the government operates under the rule of law or under the whim of the president. This is the convergence of crises that the White House is desperately trying to manage, and the panic is real. Insiders are briefing. People inside the administration are talking to journalists, trying to shape coverage, trying to shift blame, trying to figure out how to respond to a lawsuit that proves exactly what critics have been saying about Trump for years. Let me break down the specific allegations in the lawsuit, because understanding the legal claims helps you understand why the White House is so worried about what comes next. The agents allege that their termination violated the First Amendment. The First Amendment protects government employees from being fired for their political beliefs or associations. And the agents have a strong case because their involvement in the election interference investigation was minimal and administrative. They were not making decisions. They were not setting policy. They were not in positions where their political views could have affected the outcome of any investigation. They were support staff. And they were fired because Trump wanted revenge on anyone associated with that case. The agents also allege that their termination violated the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment guarantees due process before the government can deprive someone of their job. And the agents claim that they were fired without the procedural protections that federal employees are entitled to, without the opportunity to challenge the basis for their termination, without any process at all. These are not fringe legal theories. Courts have repeatedly ruled that political firings from federal agencies are unconstitutional. The legal precedent is clear. The law is settled. What Patel and Bondi are doing is likely illegal. And if this lawsuit goes to trial, if it goes through the appeals process, Trump's people are probably going to lose. That is why the White House is panicking. A loss in this case would be devastating. It would be a court ruling that the Trump administration violated the Constitution by firing federal employees for political reasons. It would be judicial confirmation that the DOJ has been weaponized. It would be evidence that Trump is doing exactly what his critics have accused him of doing. But the legal exposure is not the only thing that has the White House worried. There is also the political exposure, because this lawsuit is happening at the worst possible moment for Trump. The timing could not be worse. The lawsuit was filed while Trump is already in freefall politically. His approval rating is at 38%, the kind of number that signals a presidency in trouble. The impeachment threats are real and growing. Republican senators are looking at their re-election prospects and deciding that tying themselves to Trump is a liability. The party is fracturing. The base is showing signs of fatigue. And now this. The lawsuit is a reminder to voters of exactly what Trump promised during the campaign. He promised to weaponize the Justice Department. He promised retribution against his enemies. He promised to go after the people who investigated him. And now he is delivering on those promises, and the consequences are playing out in federal court. For Democratic candidates heading into the midterms, this lawsuit is a gift. It is a concrete, documented example of Trump's authoritarian impulses. It is proof that he sees the government as his personal weapon. It is evidence that he is willing to violate the Constitution to get revenge on his enemies. And that is the kind of message that can move votes in a tight election. For Republican candidates, this lawsuit is a nightmare. They are going to be asked about it. They are going to be pressed to defend or distance themselves from Trump. And there is no good answer. Defend the firings, and you are defending political retaliation. Distance yourself from Trump, and you risk losing his base. The lawsuit puts Republican candidates in an impossible position, and the White House knows it. Let me also talk about the death threats, because this is the piece of the story that often gets overlooked in the political analysis. The agents who were fired did not just lose their jobs, they started receiving death threats. Real people threatened to kill them, real people threatened to harm their families, and those threats did not come out of nowhere. They came from the environment that Trump and Patel created. When Trump calls investigators corrupt, he is not just expressing an opinion. He is labeling them as enemies. When Patel calls investigators disloyal, he is not just making an observation. He is marking them as targets. When the White House creates a culture where anyone who worked on cases involving Trump is considered fair game for attack, people hear that message. People act on that message, and the agents who were fired became targets of violence because the President of the United States and the Director of the FBI created a culture where violence against investigators seemed justified. That is not speculation. That is what the lawsuit alleges. And if the agents can prove that the death threats were a foreseeable consequence of Trump and Patel's rhetoric, the legal exposure becomes even more serious. Because then it is not just about wrongful termination, it is about creating a climate of intimidation that puts federal employees at risk. Now let me give you the bigger picture, because this lawsuit is not an isolated incident. It is part of a pattern, and that pattern is the systematic destruction of the Department of Justice as an independent institution. The DOJ is supposed to be the Department of Justice for the entire country. It is supposed to enforce laws without political bias. It is supposed to protect constitutional rights for all citizens. It is supposed to be independent from political manipulation. But Trump is systematically destroying all of that. He is turning the DOJ into a political weapon. He is using it to punish his enemies. He is using it to protect his allies. He is destroying the independence that has been the cornerstone of American justice for generations. The FBI agent's lawsuit is direct evidence of that institutional collapse. The lawsuit shows that the DOJ is firing people based on political loyalty rather than merit. It shows that the DOJ is retaliating against people who investigated Trump's conduct. It shows that the DOJ has become an instrument of Trump's revenge, and that is a catastrophic violation of what the DOJ is supposed to be. And here is what makes this moment so significant. The people inside the DOJ are fighting back. Federal employees are suing their own bosses. They are taking legal action to protect their constitutional rights. They are willing to go to court against the most powerful people in the administration because they believe in the rule of law more than they fear Trump's retaliation. That is powerful. That is significant. That is the beginning of institutional resistance. But it is also a sign of how catastrophically bad things have become. When federal employees have to sue their own government to protect their constitutional rights, that is a sign that the government itself is broken. When FBI agents have to take legal action to stop political retaliation, that is a sign that the system is fundamentally failing. When people inside the DOJ are openly rebelling, that is a sign that Trump's weaponization is so extreme that people cannot stay silent anymore. So let me tell you where this is headed, because this is not going away. This lawsuit is going to move through the courts. Discovery is going to happen. Depositions are going to be taken. Emails are going to be reviewed. The White House's internal deliberations are going to become part of the legal record. And all of that is going to be public. We are going to see documents. We are going to see communications between Patel, Bondi, and the White House. We are going to see evidence of who knew what, when they knew it, and what they did about it. And that evidence is going to be devastating. It is going to prove that the firings were political. It is going to prove that Patel and Bondi knew they were violating the Constitution. It is going to prove that Trump demanded this retaliation, and that proof is going to be in the public record, available for voters to see, available for historians to document, available for the next generation to learn from. The White House knows this. That is why they are panicking. That is why insiders are briefing. That is why people are worried about legal exposure, worried about political damage, worried about more suits coming, worried that the DOJ is going to be paralyzed, worried that the institutional collapse is underway. The panic is real. The crisis is real, and the lawsuit is only the beginning. Here is the bottom line. The White House is in full damage control mode. FBI agents are suing their own bosses. The DOJ is being exposed for political retaliation. Trump's approval is collapsing. Republican senators are fleeing re-election. The impeachment threats are growing. The courts are ruling against the administration. And the convergence of crises is happening all at once. What we are watching is the catastrophic collapse of the Department of Justice as an independent institution. We are watching a president weaponize the government against his enemies. We are watching federal employees fight back in court. And we are watching the White House panic because they know that this lawsuit is not going away, that the evidence is going to come out, and that the political damage is going to be devastating. So stay tuned. Because this is just getting started. The lawsuit is moving forward. The evidence is going to be revealed. The White House is scrambling. And we are going to be right here covering every single development as it unfolds.